first one is, we're going to let it sit down, is Vic Lund from St. Louis County here is talking about overpass planning on Newbury Road. You're up.
Okay. You want me to be up there or you want me to sit here?
You might want to use the scatter booth.
Here we got the projector. Should be enough for most folks. You got the key? All right. So, since this is the pre-agenda, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. We'll just kind of walk highlights through the presentation, open it up for any questions along the way. I'm Vic Lund, I'm the traffic engineer for St. Louis County. Welcome, and I should say good evening. You're the one welcoming me. So, Newbury Road rail crossings elimination planning project. Crossings, plural. We have 2 crossings on Newbury Road. Those are the crossings that are subject to the study. Elimination, we're going to, the objectives of the planning effort is to fully eliminate both crossings. No remnant roadways, no remnant driveways. The crossings are completely closed. Okay? And it's a planning project, meaning that we're not constructing anything, but we are certainly going through a planning process to understand ultimately what should be done here. What is the solution to accomplish the objective of eliminating both crossings? That planning process is going to include development of alternatives, consideration of alternatives, comparison analysis, all those sorts of things. Data collection, thinking about real estate impacts, environmental impacts, and then certainly a robust public engagement process. We thrive, these projects thrive when you have robust planning or public engagement. Next slide. A little trivia. Did you know that St. Louis County is known for something? We're known as the second highest number of crossings in the state compared to Hennepin County, which is number 1. But unfortunately, we have the distinction of being tied for number 1 in this competition for the most number of rail crossing crashes within the county. Let's go to the next page. So within St. Louis County, we have 219 rail crossings on all jurisdictional roadways. Most of those crossings are on the county road system, 56% to be exact. The other 44%, mostly on city streets and township roads. Interesting, the makeup of St. Louis County in terms of its industry has driven that crossing number to where it is today, particularly with the Iron Range and supporting the mines up on the Iron Range. But also, the CN Railroad, for example, uses St. Louis County as a conduit for its freight services. So the freight trains you see coming through St. Louis County, they're coming from Chicago and they're heading to Prince Rupert, British Columbia. So they go into the Asian market. So we happen to be one of the conduit sections on that entire system to get from the Chicago metropolitan area to the Asian market, which is driving the number of trains that you see at both rail crossings on Newbury Road, because that's also on the freight line for the CN Railroad. You can see that the majority of our crossings are controlled by signals and gates, and a slight majority are passive, which means they're stop control or yield control. Next slide. I can't think of a better yardstick to measure performance than what you're seeing on the screen. We have news headlines of serious crashes, particularly fatalities at rail crossings. These are the 2 most recent events that killed people at rail crossings in St. Louis County. They both happen to occur on county roads. We have on average 1 fatality at a rail crossing every 5 years. 1 fatality every 5 years. St. Louis County is towards Death County. What that means is that we believe that traffic fatalities are unacceptable. We believe that we need to have a process and a plan and efforts and resources, vision in place with the eventual realization of fully eliminating all traffic fatalities on the county road system. That's our aim. So when you say, Vic, boy, it seems like that isn't a very big number. Well, first, I'd say two things to that. Who needs to be the sacrifice? And then secondly, towards our death means zero. So I don't care where the crash is, I don't know what the circumstances of the crash, but we say that if there's a fatality on a county road segment or at an intersection with a county road, that's just simply unacceptable. Next slide. National data. So you'll see that this is national inventory data. So I find this interesting. There were 200,000 crossings nationally in the national inventory in 1980. There's about 135,000 today. So you can see that from 1980 to 2010, there was a steady elimination of rail crossings nationally. Interestingly, when you look at that red line, which represents the number of crashes at those crossings nationally, we see this interesting correlation between a reduction in rail crossing crashes, that meaning a highway vehicle, a pedestrian, or a bicyclist involved with a crash of a train. Okay? We see an interesting correlation where that also is being reduced, and then also plateauing. All right? So there appears to be a strong correlation in the risk exposure of just simply having a crossing and the number of crashes. Next slide. I'm not going to go too much in detail here, but this is Minnesota data, which is awfully similar to national data. Okay? There's 4,500 crossings in the state of Minnesota. When I say crossings, these are public crossings. There's certainly a lot more private crossings. These would be crossings that serve somebody's property, serves their house. We have a few private crossings in St. Louis County. There has to be an agreement between the railroad and the property owner or the user of that crossing. And there's typically a pretty hefty insurance premium that goes along with it to be able to have a private crossing. Okay? Next slide. Looking at our rail crossing crashes, so 2013 to 2022, we had 13 rail crossing crashes on all roads and all crossings and all roads, I should say. So 1.3 crashes per year on average. And I like to make the point that says, well, Vic, that doesn't seem like a whole lot of crashes, especially when we're experiencing hundreds to thousands of crashes total in St. Louis County on all roads each year. Look at that bold text with the underline. Based on St. Louis County crash data, if you're involved in a rail crossing crash, you have a 16 times greater chance of being killed or seriously injured. Folks, the physics aren't in our favor when we run into a train or a train runs into us. Typically what happens is the vehicle is dragged along the rail track very catastrophically, and the occupants of the car likewise go with it, and bad things happen. Okay? I have stories that I can tell you, I don't have time this evening, about the rail crossing crashes that have occurred in St. Louis County that I'm privy to, and some that are quite miraculous, if I can use that word, about how sometimes they didn't turn out to be that bad outcome. Okay? All right, next slide. The question of safety performance comes to mind. And this is interesting. So I said that most of our crossings are controlled by signals and gates. 55% of them, in this instance. But they generate 61% of the crashes. Why is that? Why in the world would we find that the gold standard of rail crossing safety, which is the installation of signals and gates, actually results in more crashes? Well, part of it is because we have the majority of our crossings controlled by signals and gates. But that doesn't explain all of it. And I'll tell you about that in a second. Let's go down. Next slide real quick. To talk about historical safety efforts. What has St. Louis County done historically? for the last 20, 30 plus years. This is what we've done. We've installed stop and yield signs. That was a federal mandate going back into the 2010s and slightly before. The second thing that we've done, the stop and yield signs all past the rail crossing. So they used to have just a crosswalk sign, but now they have either a stop or a yield sign. Mostly have a stop sign. Oh, side trivia. A yield sign, you see on the right, has the same regulatory effect as a crosswalk sign. So a crosswalk sign is actually a yield sign. It's just a variation of the yield sign. But so if you need it, at your next event, you can tell people that our crosswalk sign is a yield control. The second thing that we've also done historically is we meet annually with railroad representatives, myself included. I'm out there at these crossing diagnostic meetings. The MnDOT Rail Office, side note, MnDOT is the statutory authority for all at-grade crossings in the state of Minnesota. So St. Louis County, we have 122 crossings on the county road system with 3,000 miles of county roads. And MnDOT ultimately is the one who's the statutory authority on those crossings. St. Louis County is not. We have input, but ultimately MnDOT's the one who determines what's going to happen for those rail crossings. That's why MnDOT is involved in these rail diagnostics. Then we take that information and we condense it into a list of potential projects to submit for future funding to install signals and gates. So that's the cycle. Review the crossings, identify high priority crossings, submit those for next funding solicitations to install signals and gates. The cost of signals and gates, pretty pricey, $500,000 to $600,000 per system. So $500,000 plus per 2-quadrant signal and gate system. So let's do a little more math here. This gets more interesting. Like I said, historically signals and gates have been considered to be the gold standard for safety. Our safety program, MnDOT Rail Safety Program, has largely historically been predicated on this assumption that our objective for our safety program is to install signals and gates at 100%, so all 4,500 crossings. That's the objective of the safety program. Okay? In 2015, this is not on the slide, this little bonus material. So in 2015, I was a part of the MnDOT Rail Safety Plan update. I was on the technical advisory panel. And at that time, this was a discovery made by MnDOT, our consultant team, and those on the TAP panel, including myself. And that is, let's go down to the third bullet point real quick. If you compare, this is based on statewide data, if you compare the crossing crash density for stop control crossings versus signal gate crossings, you only see a 36% reduction in crashes when you convert from stop control to a signal gate control. Let that sink in, only 36% reduction. So you have a physical obstruction, which is the gates. You have lights on the gates. You have flashing lights on the poles. Sometimes you have cantilevers with flashing lights, as we do on the 2 mid-railroad crossings. So you have lots of stuff going on to alert the driver. So then the question is, why is it 90% or 100%? It's not because of conspicuity, meaning that the drivers aren't aware. What's actually going on is drivers are illegally trespassing. They're driving around the gates, they're driving through the gates. So it's not an issue of conspicuity, it's an issue of driver behavior. So drivers are placing themselves and others in bad positions. Okay? Thankfully, it's a minority of our drivers that are doing that. Otherwise, we see a lot more problematic numbers. Back to point number 2, in this original objective that was contemplated in our safety plan initiatives. Even if we said that's the objective, and we said in St. Louis County we want to install signals and gates in all 122 crossings, here's some problems with that, or the map that shows the problems. So there's 56 passive crossings left, those that don't have signals and gates. Based upon our success in terms of getting funding to install signals and gates, we get funding to install one new system about every 2 to 3 years. It would take 110 years for us to install and complete the objective. I don't view that as a legitimate strategy. Okay? Safety One thing about safety, folks, is that it's called the tyranny of the urgent. Every day that goes by when you have safety risks, it's just another day for an opportunity for something bad to happen. Okay, so there's always this tyranny of the urgent period of time in that regard. But the other big issue is that these signals and gate systems get antiquated. They have to be replaced. Their service life is about 30 years. You have to replace them. And so what has happened in St. Louis County, this has largely happened statewide, is our safety program has shifted from installation of new signals and gates to just simply maintaining what's out there. So by and large, the safety program in Minnesota is just simply replacing what's out there. Okay, so we're not necessarily adding a whole lot to our system. Next page. The Minnesota Strategic Highway Safety Plan recognizes and prioritizes. You can find this online. It's great bedtime reading. Find this online. Every state has to have an SHSP. Has to be updated about every 5 years. Minnesota just updated theirs last year. We went into publication. So we're going to go for the next 5 years. Otherwise, the state forfeits its federal safety funds. But notice that the Strategic Highway Safety Plan prioritizes grade separation enclosures. Okay, so this isn't just a specific county issue or local issue. The state recognizes that we really have to think seriously about closure of grade separations. Our safety plan, we actually have our first ever rail crossing safety plan that was published in June of 2024. MnDOT actually contributed to this in the amount of $50,000, so it was $150,000 to prepare this safety plan. MnDOT contributed $50,000 to that. So the idea here was to say, let's change the approach to what we're doing for rail crossing safety in St. Louis County. Let's instead of prioritizing what we used to do, which is installing signals and gates, let's say we're going to flip that on its head. We're going to start off with the default position that says you have to prove you can't close it. Start off with the default position, you just got to close the crossing. If you can't close it for whatever reason, bypass is too long, there's other circumstances that just simply don't support that, which is going to be the majority of the crossings, by the way. Then we go on to the second step, which is we have to prove we can't grade separate it. And if we can't prove we can grade separate it, or can't, which largely is based upon benefit cost analysis, then we say, okay, throw it in the third bucket, which is we'll install signals and gates when we get to it. But it's closure first, grade separation second, signals and gates last, right? The other thing that the rail crossing safety plan did is we developed what are called project sheets. So every single crossing that's recommended for a closure or grade separation includes a project sheet. So we can see exactly what the team, the safety plan team, I was on that team. I mean, I was the project manager, but we went through every single individual recommendation, came up with specific recommendations, and encapsulated those into a project sheet for documentation for posterity. So we can see what we were thinking at that time. And then that plan recommended a grade separation for Midway Road. There were 19 crossing closure recommendations and 12 grade separation recommendations total out of 122. This next page, think of these rail lines as like subway lines. If you look at a subway station, you see how your subway stops. We did the same thing here. We said, well, we know that the crossings are controlled by, and we can estimate what the safety performance will be in the future if we fully implement the safety plan. Okay? So if you look at that table, 2.5 crashes in the previous 10 years on average, and then we produce, and we would, if we fully implemented the safety plan, we would see a reduction down to 1.2 crashes, annual crashes in the after period for that rail. Okay? This is really important because when we look at rail crossings as drivers, we don't see the full picture. We have to look at it from a rail line perspective. We can't just look at it from a railway perspective, which answers the question, Vic, why are you closing this crossing, not the next one over? Well, because we have the system, they have to work together. Okay? Next slide. All right, so that safety plan has been yielding some fruit. We just got notice of the board and this was supported by a rail crossing safety plan. The county was awarded $6 million through the BUILD grant that was awarded on July 7th of this summer. So up in the city of Aurora, there's an at-grade crossing, which the reason why it was a priority for us is because if that crossing is closed due to derailment, rail damage, whatever, the detour is 20 miles. And the hospital's on the south side, the fire department's on the north side, police is on the south side, schools on the north side. That'd be a big problem if that crossing were closed, okay? Plus, this is the only place for ATVs and snowmobiles to cross for 7 to 8 miles in either direction. There's a place for the South Trail to cross, which is being extended to Hoyt Lakes. So the point is that the safety plan is helping to promote these improvements across the county. All right, let's talk specifically about Midway Road, and then we're done. So Midway Road carries about 7,000 vehicles per day in the subject area. A little bit higher further north, goes up to about 8,000 to 9,000 vehicles a day. North is Highway 2, but south of Highway 2 is about 7,000 vehicles per day. It does have one of the highest truck percentages on our county road system. We have 15 to 20% trucks by volume on Midway Road. I mean, it makes sense from a network standpoint. Connects I-35, connects US 2, connects Trunk Highway 194, connects US 53, and it's the backdoor access to the Miller Mall commercial area. So you throw all that together, you got upwards of 20% trucks on that roadway. So you multiply that times 30 trains per day, up to 30 trains per day at both crossings. I think on reality it's probably closer to 20 trains a day, but their FRA report, the official number is up to 30. So you multiply those numbers together, that's a lot of exposure, it's a lot of opportunity for travel delay, but more significantly, the last bullet, it's a lot of opportunity for serious crashes, which we have had serious crashes at the North Crossing in particular, because they're called rear-end queue crashes. So you develop this queue of traffic, quarter mile long, 1,000 feet long, 3,000 feet long, whatever the case is, and now you have the stationary end of traffic queue, and what we see is these very severe rear-end crashes where you're coming 60 miles an hour plus, and the driver's not expecting to stop because they see a two-lane highway, they expect themselves just to go along, and unfortunately sometimes people are doing this with their phone, and they run into the back of the queue. Next page. All right, so for this, before we get into the planning study or planning project, back in 2023, St. Louis County led the Midway Road Rail Crossings Exploration Study. Kicked off in May of 2023, and then was ended in December 2023. We had 3 waves of engagement with the general public, businesses, specifically the businesses in Adolph, trucking companies, and agency representation. And with that included an online survey, 289 responses. Next page, here's the results. I'm just going to read the bold lines. The greatest traffic concern based on that survey for Midway Road, and that is I-35 to US 53, is the rail crossings. That's what we heard back from the survey respondents. Secondly, 63% said that they're stopped by a train, at least on a weekly basis. These are the folks who responded. 90% of the respondents are open to changes at both rail crossings, and 75% support proceeding into a planned process, which leads us to our next page. Based on that exploration study and our commitment to follow through, the county submitted a funding application in September 2024 for $1.86 million, which we were awarded in January 2025 to perform that planning project that we're talking about this evening. The total planning project budget, $2.3 million. This is a rough timeline. So planning activities, so it's kind of more data collection, alternative analysis, that's this year, next year. Environmental assessments, we're going to go through the NEPA process and have a fully approved NEPA document at the end of the process, 27-28, and then preliminary engineering in 28-29. That'll produce the final layout. Next page. So, just some highlights of what that planning project is going to include. Like I said, robust engagement. Those are the folks we're going to be talking to, trucking industry, agencies, businesses, general public. We're going to consider things like travel time, safety performance, economic cost of doing nothing. There is an economic cost of doing nothing if we sat on our hands and said, what happens in the next 20 years? What's the total economic cost of that? Right? We have to understand that. So we're going to calculate or estimate what that economic cost of doing nothing is. That's going to give us a lot of insight into what the solution should be. I mentioned those deliverables, a fully approved NEPA document that's going to be approved by FRA and Federal Highway Administration. A final geometric layout, including aesthetic renderings and videos, a construction cost estimate, and ultimately this is going to help us and support the county in submitting a funding application for the capital funds necessary to implement the recommendations of the planning project. Okay? We're talking possibly, likely, most certainly, something north of $30, $40, $50 million for implementation of something out there. Okay? Remember, that little cartoon box, the objective is to eliminate those rail crossings. Remember, with that, thank you for your consideration. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions, and I look forward to talking with you at the general meeting.
You've got statistics here, does that include light rail?
For St. Louis County, it does not. For Pembroke County, it does. So statewide, the numbers include light rail crossings. Yep.
The acronym NEPA, what does that stand for?
National Environmental Policy Act. So that's the federal standard that goes back to the 1960s. When you hear things like environmental assessment worksheets, environmental assessments, categorical exclusion, project memorandums, all that kind of stuff, that's governed by NEPA. So everything that we do for those efforts are under the umbrella of NEPA, and it's a question of what level of review is necessary for a project. And so in this project, we don't know yet, that's part of the planning process to figure that out. But ultimately, we have to get sign off and buy-in and support and approval by FRA and Federal Highway.
That was going to be my next question. What type of environmental?
Yeah, we don't know yet.
Thank you.
Vic, can you tell me a little more about what exactly in 26 and 27, when we talk about planning, we're really talking about meeting with stakeholders and
Yes.
getting feedback on what options might be and how that would impact it.
So, great question. Planning really encapsulates public engagement, development of alternatives, estimating the baseline economic cost of doing nothing, and comparing those alternatives for next consideration to do a final recommendation. So the planning is kind of you're building the case, you're developing alternatives, you're getting informed by your stakeholder engagement, and that's going to set you up for this is what we're pursuing, ultimately the recommendation, which then goes into the environmental process. That'll determine what the environmental process looks like, because is it this big or is it this big in terms of its impact? It's going to determine the process that we have to go through for the environmental process.
Are your St. Louis County engineers doing this, or do you hire third-party consulting engineers?
Well, good question. I'm the project manager. So you're looking at the guy who initiated the rail crossing safety plan. You're looking at the guy who initiated the exploration study and the planning project here. But specifically the mechanics, we hire consulting engineering firms. So we've hired a team that includes Samotech, which is based out of the cities, Bolton, Maine, also based out of the Twin Cities and Mankato, and then LHP, who has a local firm. So they're going to do all the work.
Again, just when we talk about the planning process, those are the deliverable will be the geometric layout and the renderings and videos, and preliminary construction assessment. Well, to the end of that process, end of 27, we'll be able to see this is what this elimination might look like.
That is a great point, and I forgot that, and I skipped over it, perhaps in my haste. That is exactly one of the reasons. There's two reasons that we're doing the planning, maybe three. Three reasons we're doing the planning process. A, we got to go through an informed process, an objective data-driven process to get to a result. B, it helps us for pursuing funding for construction. But to your point, specifically, We want this process to be transparent, and we're going to result in an outcome that's going to give everybody clarity on what the recommendation is, so that they can also predict. Prediction is a very important aspect here, so when people see the county's plan over the next 5 or 10 years, they'll be like, this is what the county's planning to do. And they wouldn't know that, but for the results of the planning project. And if I could say one more thing, this will be, the project management team is going to include representation from the City of Hermantown and Midway Township and MnDOT, because both crossings are within the City of Hermantown. The southerly crossing of St. Louis River Road is on the boundary of City of Hermantown and Midway Township. So we're going to invite Midway Township to be a part of that PMT. And then MnDOT has US 2, which is going to likely be impacted by the solution. So we need to have all those key stakeholder groups on the same team, making the same sausage, putting these things together. So we're going to have lots of discussion between the three of us as we go through the process.
When we start thinking about geometric layout, we're going to be exactly how that's going to, Midway Road and Highway 2 is going to be impacted severely as well. Likely.
Yeah, likely. Okay, so real quick, there's two families of alternatives that are feasible for this project, or the outcome, okay? The first family, there's a lot of sub-alternatives within each of the families here. The first one is a diversion. You just simply divert Midway Road someplace else, and you close the crossings. And then you have to make the improvements on the diversion to make it happen, okay? The second family of alternatives is a grade separation. That could be a tunnel, that could be a bridge, it could be a cap. A cap is you take a big pile of dirt, for example. Disclaimer, I did not make a determination yet, so I'm giving you ideas, I'm giving you flavors, I'm not saying what's going to happen, okay? Imagine at the St. Louis River Road crossing, you take a big pile of dirt, drop it on that crossing, so it takes up like, I don't know, a quarter mile in each direction, and stack it up so it's like 40 feet tall. And then you bore a tunnel through it, you put the rail line through the tunnel, and then you put the intersection on top of the cap. Like that's an alternative, right? So there's dozens of alternatives out there, just an illustrative example of one of the alternatives, but that's gonna be the fun part.
Thanks, sir.
All right. Thank you so much.
Next, we have representatives from the school district here. Several months ago, you had asked that somebody from the school district to talk about potential for financing and commercial development. We talked with Superintendent Wayne Whitlock, so we've asked him to be here. I'll let you introduce yourself and your team. To be honest, I don't remember your name, so forgive me.
Okay.
And she's the way I understood it, she was going to do the talking because she knew more about it than I did. Yeah, just
Yes. Good evening. My name is Candace Nellis, and I am the Director of Business Services at the Hermantown School District. I have recently transitioned into this position. I was at the Cloquet School District for 11 years prior to that. So we were asked to come to the City Council to discuss just a couple different things with you. One is the agreement that the city has been in negotiations with on the roll for the $850,000 plus funding for the school district, which I will let Mr. Whitlock talk about that. And then just to talk a little bit about how that's going to affect school taxes. So school taxes work very differently than our city and county taxes. All of our funding is dictated by the state legislature. So what we can levy for is all in the state legislation. We levy to the max each year. So when it comes out on our levy certification form, which is like 39 pages long, very small, obviously. In 2022, our maximum that we could actually levy for was $6.7 million. And in 2026, that dollar amount was 6.6 million. In the total scheme of our total budget, our levy only accounts for about 15 to 18% of our actual total revenue that we spend at the school district each year. But the only way that we can actually increase that $6.6 million is to go to the taxpayers to ask for an increase with an operating referendum or a bond referendum to build facilities, like we did in 2015 for the new high school. So there's a lot of factors that go into that and how that can adjust, but most of it is all state legislation. We have student population that can adjust. So as our population kind of changes, so does our state aid and our levy calculations. The age of our buildings can also affect that, and then the population of our district. So no matter what happens with any kind of commercial property or homes that are built within the community, the state levy is $6.6 million for the school district. So we will actually not see any additional revenue from the state unless we were to go for an operating referendum. Where the city and the counties can actually receive additional revenue from any developments that come into the community. So I just came to say that really we're not seeing any actual changes by bringing in any additional homes, any commercial property, because really the 6.6 is what the state legislature tells us that we can actually set for our levy.
So I think if I were to expand anything on that, I'd say, so is there a potential that someone's school taxes would go down because a data center is being built? And our answer to that is we require way too much speculation, because it's 2026 and we're talking
2030
at least before something is built. And each year the state legislature changes things. Like one year they might say state funding is 60% of your school. We don't know if you'll do that, so they dropped that to 56, and all of a sudden we've told people that their taxes will go down, and actually they didn't. So we're just put in a position where we're not able to say that they could or couldn't go down. So it's hard to speak to the tax one because you're talking about a moving target. And I'm telling you, school funding is the most complicated thing there is. It really is. That's why I have Candace to answer questions. I will say this, I read Cindy's editorial article, and it's true, what she wrote in there is true. What I would say that we would talk about, and I want to make sure as a school that you know this, I truly and deeply appreciate the fact that you negotiate on behalf of the school district, and we're able to get money for this, potentially, in the future. If that agreement is signed, there'd have to be a joint powers agreement between us and the city on how that would be used. Currently, our ideas are that we probably want it to be spent on capital expenses, and I'm talking about the $850,000 which are 2030. We want it to be spent on capital expenses because, and that's how I would want to negotiate in, because if you put it on salaries, someday when that money stops, you know, the music stops, you fall off a cliff, so we wouldn't want that to happen. So we think capital expenses. That'd be what I would ask for. We need to get community input on how to best invest those dollars. You know, I say every dollar is taxpayer dollars. Obviously, want to go to the community. I do have ideas and the things I know. In 2035, the high school is paid off. So the high school we built in 2015 for $50 million will be paid off in 2035. I've already had others present to the board about going out for a tax neutral levy. And basically, when I say that, I try to keep our payment the same. So to try not increase taxes, but then look at what does the school need. Oftentimes, there's a high percentage of a tax neutral levy that will pass. So for example, these are my ideas, but we need to fix the elementary for sure. We looked into building a new one, it was $84 million, probably too much. In addition to that, something that happened was we could push at 135, 138, 132 in our kindergarten class. This year, 118. So I don't know if that's a trend that's going to continue, but as soon as that dropped, we kind of pulled back from maybe we won't be building a new school. Now, even with that being said, we've got bathrooms that haven't been remodeled since 1970. So when I look out at 2035, I'm picturing 20 to 25 million in remodeling or updates to that building so that we need it to last for the next 20, 25 years. CTE expansion is something also we've dreamed of. That's probably about 7 million to expand onto that. And then the final one would be an indoor field house. And obviously an indoor field house is like 30 million. What I've talked about the elementary plus the CTE, we're already over the 50 million, but the board has said you're not going beyond that. It might just be building a shell and then adding on, if this money does come in, it could be adding on each year. But again, those are just my ideas. I think we are gonna have to get community input. I ran some of these ideas by people and they said, what about air conditioning at the middle school? I'm like, that's a really good idea. So again, I think if you involve the entire community, they're gonna come up with even more ideas. But it's hard to stand in front of you and say, if this happens, here's what we're gonna do. Because I have ideas, I have wishes and dreams. I will tell you this, that money would be used to try to help better the quality of education for the students in the Any questions you have for us?
Just a question on that levy. I understand it, but in theory, if somebody, if the big taxpayer is paying in, it will reduce the taxes, the percentage of what we're all paying.
So ultimately, it's gonna shift. It'd be like if you built 10 new houses in the community, right? It's just gonna shift who's paying for it. But again, I can't say that it's gonna reduce somebody's taxes just because in 4 years, the county assessor could come back through and really skyrocket everybody's home values as well, right? So that's where we really can't say that it will reduce somebody's taxes, but it is gonna change who's paying the tax itself.
So you're still gonna collect 6.8 million, assuming the legislature's not gonna make any change.
Yes.
You're still gonna do 6.8 million. Now it's just potentially spread out over different,
Who's gonna pay for it?
Right.
Yep.
different.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So in theory, yes, but it's hard to answer that question. You don't want to get up, put your name on it, and say, hey, in 2030, your school taxes are going to go down. Because they'll be like, well, you lied to me.
On the flip side of that, if a big taxpayer doesn't come in, then everybody's taxes are gonna go up.
Unless they don't.
We're going to collect the same, where the school will collect the same amount either way, it's just a matter of where it comes from.
But every year that does go up, some.
Potentially, it could, yep, and then, of course, again, based on legislation, it could also change our aid category or levy category, depending on what they're doing in the state legislature too.
Can you expand on that, our aid category? So I thought the amount was distributed, the state was a fixed amount per student.
So it is, I guess for your base aid formula, it is. So, but there's also all these other categorical funding. So we get also funding for safe schools, and we get funding for long-term facility maintenance, and we get some for operating capital. And so there's all these other categoricals that can play in. And so when we say we get so much per dollar per kid, that could very well be very different for each school district in the state of Minnesota too, just because the makeup of each school district is never going to be the same.
So if the tax base increased enough, we might lose state funding.
We could. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so much of that stuff we don't control, that's the hard
Yeah.
part. That's why you'll hear schools always claiming no more unfunded mandates, and then please don't give us dollars that are allocated to what we must spend it on, give us flexibility, because when they give you money and assign it to something, you're like, I don't need a new roof right now. And then people will be like, why are you wasting money on that? Well, someone had an idea down with the capital to say, that's what you have to spend it on. So, anyway. Not a great session. Stay focused on it.
What do you see happening in 2035 when the high school is paid off?
I believe we'll have to go to levy sooner than that, like, because we have to have planning. So in a perfect world, Eller said 2033, but that would be a special election, which I prefer not to do. So I'd say we go in 2032, because if we wait till 2034 and it fails, then you have no time to come back. So I'd say 2032, we have to pull together a strategic planning committee and say, what do we want as a community for our schools? And again, it's just an opportunity, you know, like we wouldn't have to do it. And if people say no, that they would rather just save the money on their taxes, they could say no. But typically that's when you want to ask, is when you're about to drop off it's like to pay off the mortgage payment. Say, if we make the exact same payment, we can fix the elementary, expand the CT center, build a new field house. Would you be willing to do that at basically no tax increase, just paying what you're paying now? What services could we offer? And I think we have to put a plan together, and if we put that out to the taxpayers and they say no, they say no. But I wouldn't want to not go out and ask, because that's the perfect time to stay in front of us. Because if you don't, that elementary is going to need work eventually. If you keep ignoring it, you have to build new elementaries. We're going to get back to the corner where we have no choice. So you really want to do all the tuck pointing and get a new boiler. The extra boiler's pre-1980. You know, you really want to update those things to keep that as a state-of-the-art facility for kids.
And about how long the timeline for that?
If we went out in 2032, it's tricky because the whole timing has to, maybe we should let you do this, but the whole timing has to be, you don't want someone, let's say when you agree to this, you agree to pay $400 a month on a $400,000 loan. What we don't want is for your taxes to drop $400 and then the next year to jack them back up $450. Because then everybody's really upset about that. So what you're trying to do is build it so that your first payment comes out and you just stay very, very steady and you keep it level. So we work with others on that. They're these others are there, our financial organizations to help us with the timing. Because you can do wraparound financing. I don't love that because then you start with interest income payments. That's starting to build a little sooner. But then you just pay interest income until you get the other bond paid off.
But yes, I mean, we really want to keep our tax levy very level, and we don't want to see those fluctuations, because no one's going to remember when they saved the $400, but they're going to be really upset about the $450. So, we like to stay as level as possible, just so that people don't see those big ups and downs on their taxes. Any other questions?
I think I have one more.
Okay.
How do you continue to fund the schools when you're only getting 15 to 18% from the state?
The 15 to 18% is actually just our local levy authority.
But that's the state says that's what you guys can levy.
Yep, so then the rest comes from either federal programming, or they come from state aids, or we have other locals when we are servicing other, like we're part of a special ed cooperative too. So then ultimately we're hosting staff, and then other districts are paying us for that staff. Also for any fees that we're collecting from, for sports or game entrance or whatever. So all of that kind of goes into the whole grand scheme of things, but the majority of it is coming from the state aid.
We're one of the lowest per pupil funded schools in the state, and everyone around us is cutting. And I have to credit the board members before me, Jonathan Thornton, some of the earlier board members that actually put money into a fund balance. Because we actually have a fund balance. You'll hear it during negotiations, you have a fund balance, you need to give that to us. We're like, well, no. We're bringing in $300,000 from the state, but we're bringing in $1 billion in interest income. So we don't want to spend our fund balance because it's actually keeping us afloat and allows us to continue to function without reducing like every district around us is having to do.
And earlier you talked about other communities having to do levies to do maintenance on buildings and stuff like that. Have you guys ever considered anything like that so far?
I've done long-term facility maintenance dollars for bonding over in Cloquet when I was there, but we ultimately get $380 per pupil from the state to go towards long-term facility maintenance of our buildings. And in Cloquet, we only levied, or we only did a bond for that amount per pupil. So then we would sell $5 million bond to do large projects like roofing, and then ultimately our state aid people would just pay for that, so that we weren't increasing taxes.
So we put money aside each year. We have 10-year plans because what's going to happen is I'm worried if I go to the taxpayer and say, hey, I need roofs on the schools. They're like, why don't you plan for that? Well, we're trying. We try to put money aside each year. And the state actually says you have to spend it on that. So we do have funding. Right now, we're slated for the elementary school 2033 that we're going to need to replace some of the roofs. And we have money in our fund balance to pay for that when the time comes.
Kind of like an arena compressor, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. I've been saving for that one for quite a while.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Okay, going on to the regular agenda, we've got the minutes and the accounts payable under the consent agenda. Then we have the first reading of an amendment to chapter 9. Several months ago, we talked about the possibility of changing the 400, what we call the 400 foot rule. It basically is that if your system, if you're within 400 feet of a sewer main across the front of your property, and your system is failing, you're expanding, or you have a vacant lot in your building, a new home, and if you're within 400 feet, you're required to connect to the sewer. And if you have an existing home, you don't have to connect unless one of those things would happen. If your system is failing, you were going to expand, or the county has a program where it's like if there's a transfer of real estate they inspect your system, and if it's in a failure, you may have to upgrade. If you have to upgrade, and you're within 400 feet, that upgrade has to go to connecting to the city sewer. What we're simply doing with this proposed language is simply changing all those things remain the same, except instead of 400 feet, it's 200 feet.
The state mandates,
And that's the state, and based on the state building code.
Is there language on where the measurement's taken from? I think I've asked this question privately to everybody, and no one seems to be able to consistently answer that question. So is it from the right of way? Is it from where the line actually is?
My understanding is it's from the pipe. Where's the pipe, and are you within 400 feet, 200 feet?
Because I mean, if it's right of way, that could be a 60-foot difference, 66
Right.
foot difference, right?
It's on the side of the.
Yeah. So it's from the pipe.
From the main. From the main.
The main in the right of way.
Yes.
If it's on your side, it'll be one.
It's closer.
If it's, yeah.
So that's just the first reading. No action to be taken tonight, unless you have direction one way or the other. Then on to resolutions. The first one is 88 is approving the wetland replacement plan for the Arrowhead substation. Eric, you explain this one?
Great, thank you, Mr. Mueller. So, as you mentioned, at the Arrowhead Substation, Section 31, they're proposing to do a 1.2 acre expansion of that substation footprint. What they're going to do is replacing aging infrastructure within that development. Right now, that infrastructure is over 50 years old, so they're going to be replacing that. So as part of that, it expands that substation footprint in order to accommodate the additional electrical equipment enclosure, the site grading, installation of an additional 546 feet of security fencing, and lastly, creation of a new stormwater pond, which currently does not exist. So right now, that stormwater pond would benefit this site from the existing proposed impervious surface for this as well. So this is located approximately 1,500 feet, linear feet south of Morris Thomas Road. Basically, as you have the entrance drive coming into the facility, it's between the entrance drive and the existing substation footprint right now today. So the technical evaluation panel has reviewed this. Basically, we've gone through a couple iterations as far as the plan, and they have given their initial approval for these potential impacts.
Where does the stormwater go now?
The surface drains out to the basically existing wetlands around there.
And then a question on this map. It's actually page 35 of the packet. It shows the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can't find any correlation to what that means. What are those? Are those submarine? Are those?
I'll look on that and get that answer to you in a little bit.
Okay.
Then resolution 89 is approve an amendment to the planning development on Stepper Road. Eric, can you talk about that one as well?
Yes, thanks again. So this is an existing 10-acre property that's located essentially just north of the Peyton Acres development. So back in 2024, a PUD was approved for 20 units total, basically, which is there are 10 buildings associated with that. So what the applicant, as he has been working on the property and realizing that there's a little bit additional more upland area towards the eastern portion of the property, they're requesting the ability to add one new additional building, which would bring the total from 11 buildings to 10 buildings to 11. They add 2 additional units for this. So when able to accomplish that, they essentially would shift their previously approved garage and pickleball courts. They basically push those approximately 60 feet to the east to be able to incorporate this new building that way. So that's the only things that they would change on the property. The utilities that they've been installing so far would be able to accomplish and still serve these units that way. They just have to do a little bit more extension to this proposed new unit should it be approved that way. So other than that, the proposed stormwater basin would still be able to serve the development with the additional 2 buildings that way. And then lastly, as part of the plat, when that comes forward, the city would receive what's basically called Outlot B, which is located just to the, basically north of this proposed unit. So by the city receiving that outlot, it still maintains our ability to connect over the eastern property should we ever wish to do so in the future.
The old plan had a 66-foot right-of-way, so does that go away, and then we just we gain all of that end of the property?
That is correct, yeah. So as the Peyton Acres is built out, the ability to connect over there, that basically closed off unless there'd be a purchase of that land. So what this does, basically rather than being constrained to a 66-foot corridor, we have the ability of the entirety of that outlot B to be able to create a connection should we so choose to.
Any questions?
This went to P and Z, right?
Yes, it is.
Was there any concern about the noise from the pickleball court?
There was a couple people that did raise concerns about that. At that time, the applicant did state that the pickleball courts would not be lit, and their hours would be from 9 a.m. to dusk. So they actually put hours of use associated with that.
Who enforces the hours?
The sign.
Yeah. Who maintains the pickleball court? Is that Public Works?
Ultimately, it would be,
Okay. Or is there an HOA
No,
associated?
that is,
I thought it was ours.
no, the pickleball courts are private, so that's part of that HOA.
They're private, so the public can't go use them.
This is for the public amenity associated for this. The residents for project amenity.
So the residents maintain it for the public.
The residents maintain it for themselves.
I thought the whole point of these PUDs was they had a public gain associated with them that the public could use.
Basically, there's 2 different aspects. There's a public amenity and there's a private amenity. And that's where they say kind of blended together through time. But basically, from the public amenity, there's 3 different things that and I can agree with the staff report here, but we said, and then there's actually project amenity, which is pickleball courts.
So the general public cannot use that.
I think that was the whole benefit of the PUD was that it had a public good.
There are.
You got 3 of them, what are they? Which one does this mean?
Provision of a variety of housing and community types. Project proposes twin home buildings, which there is a general shortage of within the city. Provision of recreational amenities, including trails and parks. The project proposes 2 pickleball courts for the residents of the proposed community. There's also the ability to provide soft surface trails along the wetland areas for residents to walk on, in addition to the proposed 5-foot sidewalk within the development. Actually, I'm sorry, there's 2, not 3.
Yeah, I understood that differently as well.
In the last iteration, was the pickleball courts,
This is the exact same language from before. So really, this amendment, all this is amendment is
what was
about,
the number of units?
is adding 1 additional building.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see the reason to not approve of the building, but I do think that messaging on those pickleball courts was poorly done, because I was under the impression it was for the public. And that was the whole point of the PUD. I guess if the public good is that it's supplying a new type of housing, I mean, I don't know if that serves the public, it serves people that are living there.
I'm confusing this with the pickleball court that was going to be across the street.
But we turn our way up.
Yes. I just asked if it might be confusing this with a proposed pickleball court that was across the street at the Pillars. That was taken out of the project.
Well, I think the Pillars one had the same issue, right, where it was supposed to be for everybody, and then it turned out it wasn't for everybody.
It went away.
Which they said was an insurance liability
Yeah.
issue.
And then we also, okay, we're going away aside, when at the pillars, did we also talk about how it's instead of the pickleball court, we talked about trailers which are around the perimeter instead.
Which we got.
Which
And money.
And money.
Yeah.
I thought it was $50,000 for the trail project.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if there's language in it that a new type of housing is the public good associated, we might as well remove the language about any other public good, because you can make that argument for every PUD out there. Rather than wasting people's time on this discussion essentially.
But there also is, how do you think about what it means for a public good? Because we could simply approve this housing development and not say anything about whatsoever about him providing recreational amenities for those residents. Those residents are the public and they benefit from that, as opposed to not allowing that, not requiring that to happen.
And the pillars did also have tax abatement, correct? Is that part of the?
Yes, but that again, forget about the pillars for a second. If we simply talk about this, is that PUD provides for a public good for the residents of that, because the alternative is you just allow the housing without any recreational amenities whatsoever for those residents.
Is the same topic, I guess. We approved the apartment buildings on the corner of Stetton and Arrowhead Road with a public garden. Is that a public garden just for the people that live in the apartment building, or is that for the public?
My understanding of that is they have the ability that the public can essentially utilize that space, but they need to coordinate with management. And that was for the developer, that they would said that.
I'm going to move on to 2026-90 is approving the final plans and specs for Hawkeye Utilities. David, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor and Council. So this is the utility work associated with the new utilities up the Lake bypass from Highway 53. And if you remember, this is connected to the deed grant that we secured. So we're going to use the deed grant to fund this project. So the project entails the extension of the sanitary sewer from the manhole on Ugsted in front of Erie, cross Highway 53, and then up to the new entrance to that site development. And then the water main is already on that side of the road, so we're just extending new water up the lake bypass and into the new cul-de-sac. And one other thing that's part of the sanitary sewer is we're putting a new lift station at the corner of the intersection, and then lift station on what we call Ugsted 3, which is just south of Twin Pines. That one is being upgraded to accommodate the additional flow. So that's the first bid package that we're going to do. So we're going to try to get that, most of that work done this year, and then have it completed by June 1st of 27. And then the roadway improvements, both city and county, that's our second bid package, which the plan is to have that completed by the end of this calendar year and get out for bids around the first of the year. And with a completion date of October 27. So by the end of October, new street and utilities in that section of town. Any questions?
Is the total source of funding from deed, or is it a combination of it?
Good question. So there's a
mix of revenue that's being used on the entire project. Some of it is deed money. We're putting some sales tax money toward the water improvement, which was part of the development agreement with the developer. And the landowner was also going to contribute approximately $2 million in assessment for that. And I think there might be some other road improvements as well there. But so there's a mix of utility funds for that entire project. City, deed, and the landowner.
Have we done the assessment process?
It's part of the development agreement. So instead of the assessment, they agree to be assessed over time, but it's not an assessment per the 429 process. It's an assessment process
Within the development?
within development. So sometimes instead of going through the assessment process, typically a project that covers multiple landowners. In this case, in lieu of an assessment, we have a development agreement.
And how do we get that money?
They pay it as part of their taxes. That process, yes.
How are we paying for it now? Is it coming on?
So, at some point in time, we will issue bonds for this project, and we'll pay the bonds back through that assessment, sales tax dollars for water improvements, and some of it will be funded straight by the deed grant.
So we're gonna bond for everything that's not covered by the deed grant.
Yes. Resolution 92 is an agreement with Braun to do engineering services, because as we do put in these utilities, we're going to run into some groundwater. And groundwater may very well be impacted by the environmental history of this site, and may be contaminated. So if we need to de-water, we're going to have Braun review what we need to do with that, and potentially have that trucked off-site. David, can you speak more of this?
Yeah, so Braun is the consultant that's working with the landowner right now, and they have a plan in place. So what we are anticipating is some, once we dig into the groundwater, we can't leave the water on site. So once we get into it by digging either a footing for our building or a utility, we have to remove that water. So this resolution has Braun that's going to test it, determine whether there's contaminants in the water that need to be dealt with, and we have set up a plan with WSSD. We have a makeup, a composite of that material. They can accept the material, so then we put it in a truck and we bring it about a mile down Oxford Road, and we open up a manhole and we put it in there, and then it goes down the front line to the WSSD. So this agreement is for, it goes hand in hand with the resolution just before. So in the bidding documents for the utility package, there will be a line item that the contractor has to deal with this contaminated water. And then that contractor has to follow the directive of Braun and how to treat it and convey it.
That was really my question, because you said we will truck it.
Yeah.
The contractor will truck it. It's
The
part
other
of the-
contractor.
Part of the bid documents.
Yes.
The Royal We. Does WLSD get brought into this at all?
Yes, we met with them. So we, the owner of the property through Braun did a analysis of the groundwater, figured out what was in it. We shared those results with WSSD, and it was in a magnitude of 10 to 20 times below the threshold where they would not accept it. So well within the tolerances of what they can accept and treat. So once we found that out, then there's two methods to get the waste there. Either truck it all the way down there, or we truck it to a manhole and we put it in the manhole.
Okay, any questions about that? Resolution 92 is pay request number 1 for the water connection that's being built at Haynes and Anderson Road. David, you want to speak to this?
Yeah, so this is payment number 1 for the second water line connection / metering station / pumping station at the intersection of Haynes Road and Anderson Road. So, if you remember, we hired SCH, their consulting engineer that did the design of this facility. They're doing the construction, engineering, and management of it. They are working with Lakehead Constructors, who we have a contract with to build this facility for us. So Lakehead provided a schedule of values, and we're holding 5% retained, but after that, it's about $107,000 worth of the work they've done so far. So that's what this first estimate is for.
Resolution 93 is a pay request to Gardner Refrigeration for the HVAC work that's being done on City Hall. Brandon sitting in the back, maybe you could explain what work we've done to date.
Yes, thank you. So request number 1 is to cover work to date. It's roughly 10% of the overall project budget, although Gardner reports to me that they're actually close to 75% done. They actually would have been done even sooner, but they were waiting for background checks so that their staff could work in P. Those have cleared, so they're going to be coordinating work in there shortly, and they actually anticipated that we'll be done by the end of this month. So this is just paying that first payment amount with the 5% retainage held out.
At the last couple of meetings, I think tonight, I've noticed some noises that we haven't heard in the past. Is that new equipment, or is it old equipment that's making noise, or has anybody else heard it? No?
We do have some new equipment.
Hearing aids.
Some of it is even simply equipment is functioning that wasn't. So part of the problem before is our controls were not communicating with valves, actuators, VAVs, and they simply weren't turning on and functioning. So part of what you might be noticing is just quite simply that they're functioning. The other potential is our wonderful tech person in the video room was always overheating, so we added a small magic pack in there to keep the equipment cool and keep them from dying of heat stroke. So that's functioning. That's actually right outside the window. You may occasionally hear next to the
Bill's office, actually.
He's not quite so, he tried, but not quite so lucky. So that's actually in and functioning and benefiting from it now. So that most likely is what you're hearing.
All right, thank you.
Resolution 94 is change order number 4 for the King Creek Trail for a decrease of $485,000. David, can you explain this one for us?
Yeah, so Mayor and Council, this is change order 4, which I've broken into 2 parts. The first part are a number of, there's 8 items that relate to the elimination of part of 2 different retaining walls. So this spring, as we dove into this project a little deeper, we saw an opportunity to adjust the grade, meaning the elevation of the trail. And in doing that, the large wall that's below the park or south of the park, we were able to reduce the length of it and height of it. And then the wall that's north of Morris Thomas, which was going to back up to the possible Birch Hills project, that wall we were able to completely eliminate. So these 8 items address everything that associated with that. So there's some extra clearing and grubbing that we had to add. The wall, the railing, and pipe we were able to decrease because of the ability to illuminate the wall. We had to do some extra excavation. It's like sloping the back of the trail, and that's the added cost. But the net result, again, is a savings of $485,000. So a significant change order. I mean, if you look at this, just the metal railing on top of the block wall is $180,000. So we think this is, we've been talking about it for about a month and a half, and it took us a while to negotiate with the contractor what the actual savings are. So I'm glad to report that, you know, we're at a substantial amount there. And then the second piece of this is, if you remember, this project had 2 crossings that required a DNR permit, and we were not able to get through that permitting last year, so we didn't secure the permit until June 3rd of this year. So there's been a question, why are we a little behind schedule? Why did the contractor start late this year? Primarily, that was due to us securing the permit and them being able to start on these crossings. Related to that is they did not get their shop drawings approved for the second crossing until this permit was secured. So now we're in the, we approved those shop drawings, they're fabricating the bridge, and we're not expecting that to come until, I believe it's the end of September, where we're actually going to get the bridge. So the second part of this change order is recognizing that and then extending the completion date out to October 30th of this year. About that, is there any questions?
I love the savings of $485,000. I don't like the fact that we have to wait it out to get it done for 2 reasons. Part of this work was going to be all the benches and amenities on the old trail, and they could have been doing that and they haven't. I do see that stake. I mean, unfortunately now it's going to be snowballs and people will be just able to use it. Is there any way to get those benches and those amenities on the existing trails done before?
Yes, that work is, I see they mobilized a backhoe into Center Park to start that work. So I'm anticipating in the next week, work will start. But just a reminder to the council, I had that same concern, and we vetted that with the contractor, and the amenities are not the schedule driver here, it's the bridge. They can't do paving until the bridge is in place. And
Right. No,
they can get the amenities, they can get the benches, they can get the pavilion done, and that will be done well ahead of the 30th.
Okay, at least for those fall hikes, people will have that. Then the other thing, of course, is now you start getting into the cooler weather and bituminous and whatnot, and we've had this discussion before. Is there any way we can get some of that bituminous done? I know between Johnson and, I suppose they want to come in and do it all at the same time, but.
Good questions, and questions that I've discussed with the contractor at previous weekly construction meetings. The response is, we can certainly do that, but it's added cost because they bid to mobilize once. So we'll have to make a decision if it's in our best interest. I fully support getting paving done earlier than later. You seem to get a better product, better compaction, and so as the way it was left the last time we discussed this is let's wait for this bridge. They're telling us, you know, end of September, but it could be earlier, and so I'll keep you informed.
After the pavement goes down, they still gotta landscape the edges and.
Yep, they're shouldering.
So I mean, so there's work to be done. Shouldn't be paving right at Halloween.
Correct. And agreed.
Okay. Well, I think we just have to keep on for that. All right, thank you. But the $485,000 is great in savings.
I think the other part that nobody mentioned is that reducing the retaining wall also reduces some maintenance issues in the long run as well. Yeah. Resolution 95 is a change order number 5 for that King Creek Trail segment. segments for special culverts and box culverts. David, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I didn't want to lump this all in change order 4, so I created change order 5 here. And this, there's basically 2 pieces to it. One is, once we saw the spring runoff, we better identified where some of these cross culverts need to be that conveys water from one side of the trail to the other. So we moved a couple of them and we added a couple of them, so that's what's in items 1 and 2. And then the third is when we finally did get the DNR permit, they wanted some substrate deposited in the bottom of the box culvert for the fish habitat. So that was not an original plan, so we had to add that as part of this.
What do we put in there? Rocks? Gravel?
Yeah. And this morning I was out there with the DNR and we reviewed what we've done, so.
The other thing we had talked, I thought maybe it was you or Eric, we were talking about as you go down the hill of Boulder Trail from the soccer field to the Y, there's a couple of culverts that he thought we had talked about fixing those like we did over at the other one too.
Yeah.
As long as they're going to be down there with concrete.
Yeah, that's what we're planning to do, that, just cut those out.
But that'd be another change order. That makes sense. They're going to be down there with concrete. That's right.
Okay, and then that's the end of the action items. Mayor, anything?
Tomorrow night, we have National Night Out here, 3 to 7, blood drive. And next week, on Tuesday, we have the end of the primary election. Early voting, but up until that is.
John, anything?
I asked before, and I think it was still undetermined, where are we headed with the Stegner Road design?
So I think kind of where we're at now is that we're going to put an RFP together for the engineer.
Okay.
The idea of trying to make that happen in 28.
Okay.
But it's a completely new road, right? We're not milling over lane. There's a combination.
So when we met at the staff level on this, we were going to bring a presentation to the council and summarize our findings and recommendations. But to answer your question, and Brian, this is a rehabilitation. Okay, so the state aid rules dictate what we can do under a road rehabilitation. And it says you can work on your pavement section, you can't get into your base, and the curb and gutter is limited to 25%. So what we do know is the sidewalk is not ADA compliant, so that's all being replaced. The curb and gutter will replace 25% or thereabouts. And we plan to take likely a 3-inch mill and overlay. And if we all work with Paul, if we have some utility upgrades, we may have to do that. If we have some soft spots, we'll do some subgrade correction similar to what we done in Munstead. But that's kind of a preview of what we'll present to the council in a future meeting.
Similar to what we did at Munstead.
Correct.
Which I hate when you go down there, you gotta roll over the room, but I understand why we do it.
The old still functions, it just looks different.
That's right, yeah. My car went through, it was all dented, and I don't like driving a dented car, so I'm gonna do that, but anyways. Finger playground, anything you want to add?
Yes. So, the contractor that did the playground work has come up with a plan for making corrections. So I have an on-site meeting with him Thursday morning to walk through that before the work gets done. So we're going to get that penciled in, and then there's likely going to be an agreement that costs are shared between three parties, the city, the contractor, and the subcontractor. So I'm going to outline that and present that at the next meeting.
The corrections will be done this year yet?
Yes.
Nice. The other thing, John, I see Gunner's not here, but just before we maybe change attorneys, we want to put a bow on that THC thing that we've been talking about. We need to wrap up that. And then at the park board meeting, we had a discussion about baseball field maybe, and I guess maybe Joe's been heading that up, and just wondering what's our next steps on that?
So, Mayor and Council, we had another good discussion. It's always really challenging because in essence, when you talk about naming anything, in this case naming fields, it's really where you draw the line on who doesn't get a name. And obviously we have limited space, so any naming field that's off that tip. So it's always a really good, robust discussion, and for us to take it very seriously. Right now where it stands is, I guess you could call it a homework assignment for the folks interested in pursuing that, and bring back some materials similar to what we did with Georgetown Mag over at Rose Road and South End. Haven't received those yet, and there wasn't a hurry or rush on it. And then also, as you know, the council had actually a discussion about potentially less naming and more kind of commemorative wall for the community members. So we're going to kind of see, once we get the materials back from this particular party, if that's the
In regard to those benches along Boulder Trail and other, once those start going in place, I think we should hit our PR department up for promoting that, that those are donations accepted for that and naming rights of those benches. So, okay, a couple things on the data center. I'd certainly appreciate the school district being here tonight. I think that was great. One of the concerns that's been talked about are land values, and John, I was wondering, is it possible to have a similar work session with St. Louis County appraisers? Could we get them to come in and talk and tell us any expectations about what could or couldn't happen with land values?
We can ask, I have no idea what they would do, or what we willing to say, or what we can truly ask them.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to reach out to a county that has similar facilities instead of someone in St. Louis County that has experience raising homes around a facility like that?
I think that would be, I guess that, and maybe, I just think we haven't addressed it much. It wasn't discussed at all at our work session. And the other thing, after our work session, I would like a little clarity on the timeline of agreements and where we're headed from here till the end of the year with AUAR approvals. Just kind of the anticipated approvals and what we'll see over the next few months. And again, as I said last week, I want to have some time to weigh in on all of the discussion about the plan. And, before we get a plan and say, here, approve this. So that's, again, just my thought. So a timeline would be helpful, because I've had residents ask too, what's going on? And my other question was, again, at the meeting, there was, I think it was at the council meeting, Minnesota Power talked about sales tax on the utilities, so that we could collect sales tax on the power consumption. Do we do the same with water and sewer? Do we then collect sales tax on water and sewer?
I'm not a water or sewer customer. I don't know that.
I mean, it's a question.
I don't know that.
It sounds like a state law.
Right.
So we can look into that, but just something that.
Specifically, but because it's specifically, we talk about Minnesota Power and electricity.
And did I hear the number right, that Minnesota Power representative said it was $2 million that the city could expect to generate from that sales tax?
Someone else remind me.
Remember that?
I don't remember.
Yeah, looking back at some notes thinking, if 1.5% is $2 million, that's a big utility bill.
Yes.
So, okay, I think these two, I think we're good, thanks.
Andy? Nothing tonight.
I'd like to echo John's statement about feedback and having some say and having more time to provide feedback than just Thursday before we get to some of these agreements. Chad, you had a schedule, man, must have been 2-3 months ago, about all the upcoming approvals associated with the estimate project. Is that still accurate? Are we still following that schedule?
President Boucher, Commissioner LeBlanc, the schedule changes pretty readily depending on a number of factors. Mortensen and Google maintain a schedule. We accept applications and we have timelines around the AUAR, but we don't maintain really a schedule per se. But that said, the 30-day comment period on the AUAR has closed now. We expect to post the draft AUAR to the EQB. Those are due on Tuesdays, so depending on whether or not we can get things buttoned up, get comments appropriately and sufficiently addressed, and whether or not we can make the appropriate amendments to the AUAR in response to those comments. We're hoping to post those to the EQB this month. That then would trigger the 10-day objection period from the state agencies. And then whether or not a state agency objects during that 10-day period would then mandate whether or not, would determine whether or not there would be a draft AUAR brought forward and posted for your consideration. If they do object, then obviously that delays things. There's a back and forth time that happens with the agency, and then we bring it to the EQB. We can't set it on an appropriate settlement within the draft AUAR amendment. So multiple factors. We have talked about as staff the potential of having a work session. In fact, I think we are going to have a work session once with the planning and zoning, and the potential to have council be there at that work session to be able to respond to what the application is and what's within the application, not following the typical process of providing it the Wednesday or Thursday before the meeting and then having only a week to review it, so, or 4 days, a weekend. So understanding this is a very complicated, very robust application. The hope is to give a month, if not more than a month, multiple months for you to be able to review it and then be able to provide feedback during the work session and then the following meeting. So, and in response via correspondence and email upon further review. So we recognize, hopefully we do expect to have that work session this week, or sorry, not this week, this month with planning and zoning. So yeah, things will be coming. We're hoping sometime in September, early November, or sorry, September, early October, to be able to bring the AUAR forward for adoption, consideration, and then application to P&Z formally, along with the SUP and the development agreement, taxpayer agreement, et cetera, forward to council sometime in September. So that is the plan. But of course, things come up, things change, objections could be had, the application could change. So more to come, but that is kind of tentative. What we expect. Thanks.
The other one, actually, was that a rendering or an actual picture of the Aurora crossing?
That was a rendering.
A rendering. The tunnel for the trail under the road, actually, driving my memory about snowmobile trails. Have we talked about the snowmobile trail crossing on the last section of our trail system? Are we expecting that the snowmobile trail is just going to stop operating across that trail?
Can you speak to that?
They still have the ability to, I'm looking at Mr. Wolf here too, but I believe even in the plan that we have basically more like a dedicated crossing area, and that the snowmobiles cross over the trail at that point. So basically kind of funnel it to a certain point and then work with signage for it. But it will continue to exist in Suffolk Creek Park.
Are we doing anything different to the trail itself at that crossing to protect the pavement or anything along those lines?
Mayor and Council, so as part of this plan, concrete where the snowmobile trail crosses the paved trail. So we're channelizing the snowmobile trail at the specific crossing. So that's and then the other thing we're doing is we're adding a culvert where the snowmobile trail matches up to our lake trail, multi-use trail. That's all.
Joe, anything?
Nothing that hasn't been covered already.
Okay, real quick, Mark, in lieu of the director of public safety, everything from the department?
Everything's good.
Okay. Eric?
Yes, in response to Councilor Geisler's question on that map for the wetland replacement plan, the areas 1, 2, and 3, and 4, those were alternative locations that were looked at to basically place this. And in the report of reasons why those were not picked. There was excessive rock, whether there was even more wetlands associated with it, whether it was the presence of basically overhead power lines that would create problems with that.
Okay, anything else? Joe? Kevin? Paul? Brian in the back? Trish?
I just want to say thanks, I'm now on the resident.
Welcome.
Okay, so it is, well, after